under the golden dog. The golden-haired dog moved through the crowd as if an invisible force guided each of his steps. St. Peter's Square, filled with faithful who had come from every corner of the world to bid farewell to Pope Francis, fell into absolute silence when the animal with an almost human dignity approached the white coffin. Lucia Vasquez, manager of a small shelter on the outskirts of Rome called Divine Hope, felt her heart stop as she recognized Ray, the dog that had mysteriously disappeared that very morning. Her hands trembled as she tried to make her way through the crowd, but it was impossible to advance. The cardinals, heads of state, and Swiss guards were paralyzed, unable to react to that unexpected intrusion. "My God, it's Ray," whispered Lucia, covering her mouth with her hands. Beside her, Father Thomas Ferrer, the shelter's chaplain, couldn't believe what he was witnessing. The cameras broadcasting the ceremony live captured the exact moment when Ray gently placed his front paws on the coffin and rested his head, as if offering a final tribute to the man who, in secret, had been the shelter's greatest benefactor for years. "This is no ordinary animal," murmured Cardinal Bianchi, the Pope's personal secretary, who had been the only intermediary between the pontiff and his anonymous donations to the shelter. "There is something sacred in what we are witnessing." The broadcast was abruptly interrupted. In the Vatican control rooms, technicians received contradictory orders. Some insisted on cutting the signal, while others argued that the entire world should witness this extraordinary moment. "Let him be," finally ordered Cardinal Mercalli, who was directing the ceremony. His voice, amplified by the microphones, resonated throughout the square. "This is a message that transcends our protocols." The crowd held its breath. Slowly, the clouds that had threatened rain all morning began to dissipate, and a ray of sunlight crossed the sky to illuminate precisely the spot where Ray remained motionless next to the Pope's coffin. In her humble apartment in Trastevere, Gabriela Sanchez watched the broadcast with tears streaming down her cheeks. As a journalist for the small newspaper The Roman Voice, she had tried for years to discover who was the anonymous benefactor keeping the shelter afloat where she volunteered on weekends. Now, as she watched Ray on the screen, she began to connect dots that would change her life forever. "It can't be a coincidence," she murmured, frantically searching for her notebook. She remembered the time she had seen Cardinal Bianchi discreetly visit the shelter, always in an unmarked car and at unusual hours. She also remembered the mysterious letters that arrived with donations, always written on the same paper that she now recognized as the one used by the Vatican for its internal communications. At the Vatican, Cardinal Bianchi felt his heart racing. The secret he had kept for so many years was about to be revealed, and he didn't know if this would be a blessing or a catastrophe for the carefully constructed narrative around the figure of Pope Francis. "We need to control this, Monsignor," Ferreira, head of Vatican communications, whispered in his ear. "The press will want to know everything about this dog and the shelter." "It's too late for that," replied Bianchi, pointing to the thousands of mobile phones capturing the moment from all possible angles. "What we are witnessing is bigger than any communication strategy." At the Divine Hope shelter, volunteers gathered around a small television. None could believe what their eyes were seeing. For them, Ray had always been a special dog, capable of consoling those who needed it most, but they had never imagined that he would become the center of a historic event. "I always knew there was something divine about him," said Maria, the elderly woman who cooked for the volunteers. "Remember how he would approach people who were suffering, how he knew exactly who needed comfort." Meanwhile, in St. Peter's Square, Ray finally separated from the coffin. With the same dignity with which he had arrived, he began to walk slowly toward the crowd. The Swiss guards, uncertain about how to proceed, formed an improvised corridor, allowing the animal to advance without obstacles. The dog stopped in front of a girl who was crying silently, seated in a wheelchair. It was Isabella, the daughter of the Argentine ambassador, who suffered from a degenerative disease that doctors had declared incurable. Ray gently rested his head on the little girl's lap, and for the first time in months, Isabella smiled. "She's smiling," exclaimed her mother, incredulous. "My daughter is smiling." Cardinal Bianchi observed the scene with a mixture of amazement and concern. He knew that what was happening would forever change the narrative about Pope Francis, but he also feared the consequences of revealing all the secrets he had kept for years. Gabriela Sanchez, who had managed to slip into the ceremony thanks to her press credentials, began taking photographs frantically. As a journalist, she knew she was witnessing a historic moment, but as a volunteer at the shelter, she felt there was something much deeper and more personal in what was happening. "I need to talk to Lucia," she thought, searching for the shelter director among the crowd. "She must know more than she's shared with us." The sun, now shining intensely over St. Peter's Square, seemed to bless that extraordinary moment. The faithful, who had come to bid farewell to a spiritual leader, now found themselves witnessing what many were beginning to describe as a miracle. And while the whole world watched in amazement, three people in very different places in Rome knew that what they were witnessing was just the beginning of a story that would change their lives forever. Lucia Vasquez, who had dedicated her life to the shelter without knowing who its true benefactor was. Cardinal Bianchi, guardian of the Pope's most intimate secrets, and Gabriela Sanchez, the journalist who had been closer to the truth than she had ever imagined. None of them could foresee the revelations that were to come, the connections that would be discovered, nor the impact that the simple gesture of a golden-haired dog would have on their intertwined destinies. The only thing they knew with certainty was that, at that precise moment, they were witnessing something extraordinary, something that transcended reason and touched the deepest part of the human soul. The days following the extraordinary event in St. Peter's Square passed in a whirlwind of media activity. The Divine Hope Shelter, previously a modest center for abandoned animals on the outskirts of Rome, had become the epicenter of a storm that shook the very foundations of the Vatican. Lucia Vasquez had barely slept. As director of the shelter, she found herself besieged by journalists from around the world who wanted to know the story of Ray, the dog that had moved the entire world with his gesture during the papal ceremony. "Please, I need a moment to breathe," she pleaded, closing the door of her small office while looking out the window at the crowd of cameras and microphones gathering at the entrance of the shelter. The phone rang for the umpteenth time that day. She was about to ignore it, but something prompted her to answer. "Miss Vasquez, this is Cardinal Bianchi. I need to see you urgently, in private." The voice on the other end of the line sounded tense, almost frightened. Lucia felt a chill run down her spine. "How can I be sure it's really you?" she asked cautiously. "The blue envelope you receive on the first day of each month for 7 years, the Cardinal replied. "You've never known where it comes from, but it always contains exactly the amount needed to cover the medical expenses of the sickest animals." Lucia sank into her chair, stunned. Only she knew about these envelopes, which mysteriously appeared in her personal mailbox and had saved dozens of animals over the years. "I'm listening, Eminence," she finally murmured, "not over the phone. There's a secondary entrance to the Vatican gardens, Via del Gelsomino. Come alone at 11 o'clock tonight. And please, bring the Pope's personal diaries that you'll find in the safe behind the portrait of St. Francis in your office." The communication was cut off before Lucia could respond. She looked at the mentioned painting, a humble picture that had been there since she took over the shelter's management. She had never imagined it concealed a safe, much less that it contained personal documents of the Pope. Meanwhile, in the newsroom of The Roman Voice, Gabriela Sanchez was working feverishly on an article that could change her career forever. She had gained access to financial records showing regular transfers from an account linked to the Vatican to the animal shelter. "There's something bigger here. I can feel it," she murmured as she reviewed documents and photographs. Her boss, Antonio Rossi, watched her with a mixture of admiration and concern. "Be careful, Gabriela," he warned. "You're stirring very deep waters. The Vatican has long arms." "It's no longer just about a news story, Antonio," she replied without looking up from her computer. "It's about the truth. The world deserves to know it." What Gabriela didn't know was that someone else was also seeking that truth. In his office within the Vatican walls, Cardinal Mercalli was reviewing classified documents with growing alarm. "How could he hide this from us for so many years?" he asked his assistant, Monsignor Ferreira. "The Pope not only funded that shelter, but he regularly visited the animals and even secretly adopted several of them that now live in the private gardens." "Perhaps he feared not being understood," replied Ferreira, remembering the controversies that had shaken the Vatican in recent years. Not everyone in the Curia shared his vision about respect for all God's creatures. "And now we have a dog that behaves as if it had been sent from heaven itself," sighed Mercalli. "The press is going crazy, the faithful interpret it as a miracle, and we don't know what to do with this whole situation." At that moment, his private phone vibrated with a message. "Cardinal, we have a problem. Bianchi has contacted the shelter director. I think he plans to give her the Holy Father's personal diaries." Mercalli's face paled. "Meet me with the Swiss guard in 10 minutes, he ordered. "We have to intercept them before it's too late." As night fell over Rome, Isabella, the girl who had been touched by Ray in St. Peter's Square, was experiencing inexplicable changes. Her parents, Argentine Ambassador Miguel Cortés and his wife Elena, watched in amazement as their daughter, who for months had been unable to move on her own, began to slightly move her fingers. "Marcos, look!" exclaimed Elena, frantically calling her husband. "Her fingers, they're moving." Doctors had been urgently summoned and were now examining the girl with professional perplexity, unable to explain the sudden improvement in her condition. "I cannot offer a scientific explanation for this," finally admitted Dr. Lombardi, the hospital's chief neurologist. "The latest tests showed irreversible degeneration of nerve tissue, but now it's as if something were regenerating." "It was that dog," Isabella asserted with a clarity that surprised everyone present. It was the first time in weeks she had spoken so firmly. "He told me everything would be all right." The adults exchanged looks of amazement and concern. A dog that spoke? Was the girl delirious? "Not with words," Isabella clarified, as if she could read the thoughts of those present. "He spoke to me here," she added, pointing to her heart. "And he told me that the Pope sent me a gift before leaving." Elena instinctively crossed herself, while her husband, a man of science more than faith, tried to process what was happening. "I need to see that dog again," Isabella said with a determination uncharacteristic of her age. "There's something I have to tell him." At 11 o'clock sharp, Lucia Vasquez stood in front of the discreet entrance to the Vatican gardens with a small briefcase containing the diaries found behind the painting. She had doubted until the last moment whether she should go to the appointment, but curiosity and an inexplicable sense of duty had been stronger than her fears. "Miss Vasquez," a voice whispered from the shadows. Cardinal Bianchi emerged, visibly nervous. "Thank you for coming. Did you bring the documents?" Lucia nodded, clutching the briefcase against her chest. "Before I hand it over, I need to know the truth. Why did the Pope secretly fund our shelter? And what does Ray have to do with all this? The Cardinal looked around, making sure they were alone. There's no time for complete explanations now. What you need to know is that the Holy Father firmly believed that animals, especially those that have suffered abandonment and mistreatment, have a special role in the divine plan. Ray is not an ordinary dog. The Pope found him dying 3 years ago and personally saved him. Since then, he seemed to have developed a spiritual connection with him. But are you saying Ray belonged to the Pope? Asked Lucia, incredulous. Not exactly. The Holy Father kept him at the shelter because he believed his mission was to console other suffering beings, but he came to visit him regularly in secret. There are those in the Vatican who considered these ideas eccentric, to put it mildly. A sudden noise startled them. Lights and voices were approaching from inside the gardens. "Quick!" urged Bianchi, taking the briefcase. "You must leave now. There are people who don't want this truth to come to light. I'll send you the diaries when it's safe." "What's in those diaries that is so important?" insisted Lucia. "The proof that what we're witnessing is not a coincidence," replied the Cardinal, as he gently pushed her toward the darkness of the street. "The Pope predicted that something like this would happen. His last words were, 'When I'm gone, creation will speak for me.'" Before Lucia could respond, the sound of hurried footsteps filled the air. The Cardinal quickly disappeared through the door, leaving her alone in the Roman night, with more questions than answers and a growing presentiment that she was involved in something much bigger than she had ever imagined. What neither of them knew was that, hidden in the shadows of a nearby building, Gabriela Sanchez had photographed the entire encounter with a powerful telephoto lens. The journalist watched as Lucia hurriedly walked away and felt she was closer than ever to discovering the truth that would change the course of contemporary religious history. The news spread like wildfire. Isabella Cortez, the girl with the degenerative disease who had been touched by Ray during the papal ceremony, was showing inexplicable signs of improvement. Doctors at Gemelli Hospital, accustomed to extraordinary cases due to their proximity to the Vatican, could not scientifically explain what was happening. "The nerves are regenerating," Dr. Lombardi explained to a group of colleagues who were watching the new MRI images in astonishment. "It's as if something had activated a healing process that modern medicine cannot explain." Isabella's room had become a constant coming and going of specialists, journalists trying to get an exclusive, and Vatican representatives who cautiously observed what many were already beginning to call Ray's first miracle. "I want to see the dog," Isabella insisted whenever someone entered her room. "I have something important to tell him." Her parents, divided between joy at their daughter's improvement and fear at the inexplicable nature of the situation, finally gave in. Miguel Cortez, using his influence as ambassador, contacted Lucia Vasquez directly. "Miss Vasquez, I know you must be overwhelmed with everything that's happening," he said over the phone in a voice that revealed sleepless nights. But my daughter insists she needs to see Ray. The doctors say her condition has been improving inexplicably since the animal touched her during the ceremony." Lucia ran a hand through her hair, exhausted. Since her nighttime encounter with Cardinal Bianchi, she had not heard from him. The briefcase with the Pope's diaries had disappeared with him, and now she wondered if she would ever know what those documents contained. "Mr. Ambassador, I understand your situation, but Ray has been very disturbed since the incident. He barely eats and seems waiting for something. I don't know if taking him to the hospital is best for him right now. Please," the ambassador's voice broke slightly. "My daughter has never shown such determination since she became ill. She says she has a message for him, something she needs to communicate." The words resonated in Lucia's mind. A message for Ray? What could a girl want to tell a dog? All right, she finally agreed. I'll bring Ray this afternoon, but only for a few minutes. I don't want him to become more disturbed than he already is. Meanwhile, in the depths of the Vatican secret archive, Cardinal Bianchi was frantically examining Pope Francis's diaries by the light of a small lamp. He had managed to evade the Swiss guard the night before, but he knew his time was limited. Cardinal Mercalli, with his growing influence within the Curia, would soon order a thorough search. "It has to be here," he murmured as he turned the pages with trembling fingers. The prophecy about the connection between animals and the divine, the signs he expected before departing. His eyes stopped on an entry dated just 3 weeks before the incident. The handwriting, normally firm and clear, showed signs of weakness, but the words were unequivocal. "Last night I had a revealing dream. I saw Light, the golden dog from the shelter, walking among the crowd at my farewell ceremony. He approached my body and then went to a sick girl. It was such a clear sign. When I'm gone, I want the world to understand that all God's creatures have a divine purpose. I have left precise instructions for Bianchi. The shelter must continue, and Light must be protected. He will be the messenger when I am no longer here." The Cardinal felt a chill run down his spine. The Pope had predicted exactly what would happen, but there was more. In the following pages, he found references to a secret place in the Vatican gardens, a small sanctuary that the pontiff had created for rescued animals, and mentions of a special document he had prepared, a sort of addendum to his official teachings. "The manuscript of compassionate creation," murmured Bianchi. "That's what I must find." In the newsroom of The Roman Voice, Gabriela Sanchez worked tirelessly, connecting dots that no one else had managed to join. The photographs of the nighttime meeting between Lucia and the Cardinal, combined with financial records and testimonies from former shelter employees, were beginning to form a coherent picture. "The Pope not only funded the shelter," she explained to her boss, Antonio Rossi. "He firmly believed that animals have a special place in divine creation, something that goes beyond the traditional anthropocentric view of the Church. He was preparing a revolutionary document about this, something that could change Catholic doctrine about our relationship with other species." "Do you have proof of this?" asked Antonio, cautious but visibly interested. "Almost," replied Gabriela. "There are references in his public, and homilies, but always subtle. I need to find that document, and I think I know who might have it, or at least know where it is." "Be careful," Antonio warned again. "You're playing with fire." "Or perhaps," smiled Gabriela, "I'm following a path that the Pope himself laid out for someone to discover." That same afternoon, Lucia arrived at Gemelli Hospital with Ray. It had been an odyssey to cross Rome, avoiding journalists and curious onlookers. The dog, normally calm, seemed restless, as if sensing that something important was about to happen. Upon entering Isabella's room, Lucia felt a strange sensation, as if the air itself were charged with a special energy. The girl, sitting on her bed with a more erect posture than her condition would have allowed days earlier, smiled when she saw the animal. "I knew you would come," she said in a clear voice, extending her hand toward Ray. The dog, without needing any indication, immediately approached her, resting his head on the girl's lap. Isabella's parents, the doctors present, and Lucia observed in silence, aware they were witnessing something extraordinary. "He's telling me something," murmured Isabella, stroking Ray's golden fur. "He wants us to go to a special place, a garden where the Pope cared for his friends." Lucia felt her heart racing. How could the girl know about the secret sanctuary in the Vatican gardens that Cardinal Bianchi had briefly mentioned during their meeting? "Isabella, how do you know about that garden?" she asked with a trembling voice. "Ray showed it to me," the girl responded naturally. "In my head, It's a beautiful place with flowers and many animals, and there's something hidden there, something important that the Pope wanted us to find. Elena Cortez approached her daughter's bed, visibly moved. "What is hidden, my love?" "A special book," Isabella answered. "It says important things about how God loves all his creatures equally. The Pope wanted everyone to read it, but some people didn't want it to be published." The doctors exchanged concerned looks, wondering if the girl was experiencing some kind of delirium. But Lucia knew there was something more, something that connected Isabella's words with the Pope's diaries and with Ray's inexplicable behavior. "When do we have to go to that garden?" asked Lucia, determined to follow this trail to the end. "Tonight," Isabella responded with a certainty unusual for her age. "At midnight, Ray will guide us." "But honey," Miguel Cortez intervened, "you can't leave the hospital in your condition. The doctors say that although you're improving, you still need constant care." "If I don't go," Isabella said with tears, in her eyes, "I won't be able to heal completely. It's part of the message, Dad. I have to be there when we find the book." At that moment, Dr. Lombardi, who had been listening to the conversation with growing fascination, stepped forward. "As a doctor, I should oppose this," he said in a grave voice. "But we have witnessed an improvement that defies all medical explanation. Perhaps we should consider that there are forces at play that go beyond our understanding." "Are you suggesting that we let our daughter leave the hospital to follow a dog to a supposed secret garden in the Vatican?" asked Elena, incredulous. "I am suggesting," replied the doctor with a small smile, "that sometimes medicine must recognize its limits, and that faith at times can be as powerful as any treatment we can offer." While the discussion continued, Ray remained calmly next to Isabella, as if he perfectly understood what was at stake. His eyes, a deep amber, seemed to contain an ancient wisdom, a connection with something that transcended human understanding. What none of those present in that room could imagine was that, at that precise moment, three distinct forces were converging toward the same objective. Cardinal Bianchi, determined to find the secret manuscript before his adversaries in the Vatican. Gabriela Sanchez, following her journalistic instinct toward a story that would change her career. And Cardinal Mercalli, who had ordered the Swiss Guard to search every corner of the Vatican gardens that very night. The clock inexorably advanced toward midnight, the hour when, according to Isabella, Pope Francis's secrets would finally be revealed. The Roman night spread a mantle of stars over the eternal city as a strange procession advanced stealthily through the alleyways near the Vatican. Lucia Vasquez pushed Isabella's wheelchair, while Miguel and Elena Cortez protectively flanked them. Ray walked ahead of the group, occasionally stopping to make sure they were following him, like an experienced guide who knew the way perfectly. "This is madness," Miguel murmured, nervously looking around. "If the media finds out that we took our daughter out of the hospital in the middle of the night to follow a dog." "He's not just a dog, Dad," Isabella interrupted with a serenity that dramatically contrasted with the tension of the moment. Her cheeks, previously pale, now showed a healthy pink color, and her eyes shone with renewed intensity. "Ray is fulfilling a promise he made to the Pope. D." Elena squeezed her husband's hand, silencing him with a meaningful look. They had witnessed enough inexplicable events in recent days to at least keep an open mind. "Are you sure we'll be able to enter the Vatican gardens?" Lucia asked Isabella. "Security is extremely strict, especially at night." "There's an entrance that few know about," the girl replied with the same disconcerting certainty. "The white-haired Cardinal will be waiting for us." Lucia held her breath. Cardinal Bianchi? How could Isabella know about him? She had never mentioned him in her presence. Meanwhile, inside the Vatican, Cardinal Macaulay was personally directing the search of the gardens. Dozens of Swiss guards, equipped with powerful flashlights, systematically combed every corner of the extensive grounds. "Eminence," reported one of the officers, "we have checked the northern sector without finding anything unusual. The papal greenhouse is closed and sealed as always." Macaulay frowned. His informants had assured him that Pope Francis had created a secret space within the gardens, a sanctuary for rescued animals, where he had possibly hidden documents compromising to Vatican tradition. "Continue the search," he ordered. "Concentrate your efforts on the area near Nicholas V's old tower. According to the diaries we intercepted, the Pope frequently mentioned the view from that area." What Macaulay didn't know was that, at that precise moment, Cardinal Bianchi was sliding an ancient key into an almost invisible lock, camouflaged among the ivy that covered an apparently solid wall at the farthest and most forgotten end of the gardens. "This access doesn't appear on any official Vatican plan," he explained to Gabriela Sanchez, who was watching him with a mixture of amazement and professional wariness. The journalist had intercepted the Cardinal as he was heading to the meeting point, and after a tense confrontation, they had reached an agreement. She would get the exclusive if she promised to tell the complete story without manipulation or sensationalism. "Why do you trust me?" she had asked, as they hurriedly walked through secondary alleyways. "There are journalists with much more influence than me." "Because you're the only one who has investigated beyond the surface," replied Bianchi. "The only one who has sought the truth, and not simply a shocking headline. And because you worked as a volunteer at the shelter, which means you understand the special connection between humans and other creatures." The door opened with a barely audible creak, revealing a narrow passage. "Quick!" urged the Cardinal. "We don't have much time before Macaulay extends the search to this area." At the main entrance to the gardens, the group, led by Ray, finally reached their destination. The Swiss guard on duty observed them with perplexity, especially the dog, who seemed extraordinarily comfortable in that environment. "I'm sorry, but you cannot enter at this hour," he declared with professional firmness. "The gardens are closed to the public, and today especially there is a security operation in progress." "Please," Isabella intervened from her wheelchair. "We need to see Cardinal Bianchi. He's expecting us." The guard hesitated. He had received specific orders not to allow access to anyone, but the presence of an obviously ill child threw him off balance. "I don't have authorization to..." His words were interrupted by a clear and determined bark from Ray. The dog had sat with dignity in front of the door and was staring fixedly at the guard, as if communicating something with his amber eyes. At that moment, another guard quickly approached. "Giorgio," he whispered in his companion's ear. "That's the dog, the one that was at the ceremony." The first guard visibly paled. Like everyone at the Vatican, he had witnessed the extraordinary behavior of the animal during the Pope's funeral, and stories about supposed miracles associated with him were widely circulating among the staff. "You'll wait here while I consult," he finally decided, disappearing behind the security door. A few minutes later, to everyone's surprise, the door opened again. "You may enter," announced the guard with a voice that tried to disguise his own amazement. "But only the girl and one more person. Those are direct orders." "I'll go," Lucia immediately offered. "I know Ray better than anyone." Elena and Miguel exchanged concerned looks. "Our daughter?" "I'll be fine, Mom," Isabella assured with a reassuring smile. "Ray will protect me, and I need Lucia when we find what we came to look for." After a painful temporary farewell, Lucia pushed the wheelchair through the door, with Ray walking solemnly beside her. A young member of the Swiss Guard was waiting for them inside. "I've been ordered to take you directly to the North Garden," he explained in a low voice. Cardinal Bianchi left specific instructions. You must be extremely cautious. There are other people searching the gardens tonight. As they advanced along paths dimly lit by the moon, Lucia noticed how Isabella seemed to absorb energy from the environment. Her hands, previously weak and trembling, now gripped the wheelchair's armrests with surprising firmness. "Do you feel all right?" she whispered, concerned. "Better than ever," the girl replied. "I can feel it, Lucia. We're close." The North Garden turned out to be a relatively small area, almost hidden behind densely planted bushes. In its center, an ancient fountain softly murmured under the silver light, creating an atmosphere of serene intimacy. "Cardinal Bianchi and another person are already here," informed the guard before discreetly withdrawing. "You have exactly 30 minutes before the next search shift reaches this area." Indeed, emerging from the shadows, the figure of the Cardinal materialized alongside a woman whom Lucia immediately recognized. "Gabriella, what are you doing here?" The journalist simply smiled enigmatically, while Cardinal Bianchi knelt before Isabella, taking her hands in his with reverence. "My dear child," he said with an emotional voice, "the Holy Father spoke of you in his diaries. He described you exactly. A little messenger with eyes as clear as the spring sky, whom illness has not been able to rob of her inner light." Isabella nodded, as if that didn't surprise her at all. "And you are the guardian of his secrets, the only one who completely believed in his vision." "Not the only one," the Cardinal gently corrected, "but one of the few within the hierarchy willing to risk everything for it." At that moment, Ray, who had remained unusually still, began to walk decisively toward the fountain. Stopping at one of its sides, he started to gently scratch the polished stone ground with his paw. "He's marking the spot," murmured Gabriella, who had discreetly taken out a small recorder. "Exactly as the diaries said." Cardinal Bianchi quickly approached, feeling the area indicated by the animal. His experienced fingers found a small, almost imperceptible relief. He pressed firmly, and to everyone's amazement, a section of the fountain's base silently slid to one side, revealing a hidden compartment. "Il manoscritto della creazione compassionevole," read the Cardinal, as he carefully extracted a volume bound in simple brown leather. "The manuscript of compassionate creation. The Pope's last spiritual testament," added Gabriella, approaching to better observe the document. "A text that could revolutionize the Church's relationship with nature and animals." Lucia observed the scene with a strange mixture of emotions. Everything seemed simultaneously unreal and more true than anything she had experienced before. Why did he hide it? Why didn't he publish these ideas openly? "Because he knew they would need a sign to be accepted," replied the Cardinal as he reverently leafed through the pages. "A divine confirmation that this path was the right one. And that sign," his voice broke slightly, "was precisely what happened during his funeral, an innocent animal showing more compassion and respect than many humans." "Ray," murmured Isabella, extending her hand toward the dog, who immediately returned to her side. "Or should I say, Light?" "Light?" asked Lucia, confused. "That was the name the Pope had given him," explained Bianchi. "It means light in our language. He changed it to Ray when he left him at the shelter to maintain the anonymity of their connection." A sudden sound, breaking branches and distant voices, interrupted the conversation. "The Swiss Guard!" the Cardinal urgently whispered. "Mercalli must have ordered this area to be searched earlier than planned." "We have to get out of here," said Gabriella, quickly storing her recorder. "If they find us with the manuscript—" "No," Isabella interrupted with surprising authority. Her voice, though childlike, conveyed absolute determination. "We haven't finished yet. There's something else we must do." To everyone's amazement, The girl slowly rose from her wheelchair. Her legs, weak but functional, supported her for the first time in months. With faltering but determined steps, she approached the fountain. Isabella. Her name escaped like a sigh from Lucia's lips, who couldn't believe what she was witnessing. "The water," said the girl, pointing to the crystalline surface that reflected the moonlight. "The Pope left a message in the water." Cardinal Bianchi, immediately understanding, opened the manuscript to the last page and read aloud, "Sin, innocence, and pure faith meet before the fountain of life. The water will reveal the path to universal reconciliation." As if responding to those words, Ray approached the fountain and, with delicacy, touched the water's surface with his muzzle. Instantly, an inexplicable phenomenon began to manifest. The water seemed to illuminate from within, projecting onto the nearby wall what were clearly words written in Pope Francis's unmistakable handwriting. "A final message," whispered Gabriella, unable to contain her amazement, visible only when the precise conditions are met. The voices and footsteps were rapidly approaching, but none of those present could take their eyes off those luminous words that seemed to float in the air of the Roman night. A last legacy of the man who had dedicated his life to building bridges between the divine and the earthly, between humanity and the rest of creation. The luminous words floating in the night air of the Vatican garden were clear and precise, a final message written with the wisdom of one who had contemplated divine creation from a unique perspective. When humanity understands that every creature is sacred, that every form of life deserves respect and compassion, only then will it achieve its true communion with the divine. Animals, in their innocence and purity, are silent messengers of God's love. Listen to them. Lucia, Gabriella, Cardinal Bianchi and Isabella contemplated those words with tears in their eyes, aware they were witnessing a moment of spiritual transcendence that would forever change their lives and possibly the course of the Church. "We have to protect this message," whispered Bianchi, nervously looking toward the increasingly closer sounds of the Swiss Guard. "The complete manuscript must reach the right hands, but how?" asked Lucia, still supporting Isabella, who was miraculously standing. "They're searching the entire garden." At that moment, Ray, or Light, as they now knew he was really called, emitted a soft bark and headed toward a small lateral path, barely visible among the vegetation. "He's showing us another exit," said Isabella, with absolute conviction. "I know this path. I've seen it in my dreams. It leads directly to St. Peter's Basilica, to a side chapel that almost no one visits." Cardinal Bianchi nodded slowly. The Chapel of Creation. The Pope had discreetly renovated it just a year ago, incorporating motifs of animals and nature in an iconography that many considered unusual. "We don't have time to discuss," interrupted Gabriella, quickly storing in her bag some photographs she had taken of the luminous message. "If Macaulay finds the manuscript, he'll destroy it before it can be studied." With determination, the small group followed Light down the narrow path. Isabella, strengthened by some inexplicable energy, walked with Lucia's support, refusing to return to her wheelchair. "I can do it," she insisted whenever someone expressed concern. "It's part of the miracle. I must walk to complete the message." The path indeed led them to a discreet door that opened directly onto a side corridor of the Basilica. The grandiose church, normally filled with tourists and the faithful during the day, lay in reverent silence at this hour of the night, illuminated only by votive lamps and a few strategic spotlights. "The Chapel of Creation is at the end of this corridor," indicated Bianchi, advancing cautiously. "It was the Holy Father's last personal project. He insisted on personally supervising every detail of its renovation." Upon reaching the chapel, the group was momentarily speechless, unlike the traditional iconography that dominated the rest. Of the basilica, this space was decorated with beautiful mosaics that depicted not only saints and angels, but also animals of all species in a harmonious integration with humanity and the divine. In the center of the altar, an impressive circular stained glass window showed St. Francis of Assisi surrounded by creatures of all species, with a golden-haired dog standing out in the foreground. "It's him," whispered Isabella, pointing to the image of the dog in the stained glass. "It's light." Cardinal Bianchi approached the altar and, after a moment of hesitation, pressed a specific sequence of stones at its base. With a soft click, a secret compartment opened, revealing a space perfectly dimensioned to house a book. "The Holy Father prepared everything," he explained as he carefully placed the manuscript in the compartment. He knew this moment would come, though he wouldn't be here to personally witness it. "But why so much secrecy?" asked Lucia, confused. "If these were his beliefs, why not share them openly during his life?" "Because some truths need prepared ground to flourish," replied the Cardinal with a sad smile. The Pope knew that his ideas about the spiritual dignity of animals were too revolutionary to be accepted without resistance. He needed a sign, a divine confirmation that no one could deny. "And that sign was what happened during his funeral," completed Gabriella, finally understanding. "Light approaching the coffin, consoling Isabella, the whole world seeing. It lived. It wasn't coincidence." "There are no coincidences in the divine plan," Bianchi nodded, "only significant coincidences that we must learn to interpret." At that moment, Light, who had remained extraordinarily calm throughout the journey, began to bark softly in front of the stained glass. The moonlight, filtering through the stained glass, created luminous patterns on the chapel floor, forming what appeared to be a direct path to the altar. Isabella, following that path of light, advanced with increasingly sure steps. Upon reaching the stained glass, she extended both hands toward the image, touching precisely the point where the golden dog appeared. What happened next left everyone breathless. The stained glass began to glow with a supernatural intensity, projecting a beam of light that completely enveloped the girl and the dog. For an instant that seemed eternal, both were suspended in that extraordinary luminosity. When the light finally dimmed, Isabella remained standing, but her expression had changed. A smile of deep understanding illuminated her face, as if she had just received a transcendental revelation. "Now I understand," she said in a clear voice. The Pope wanted the world to understand that healing doesn't come only from medicine or spectacular miracles, but from recognizing the sacred interconnection between all forms of life. Extending her hand to Light, the girl continued, "My illness began to reverse at the exact moment Light touched me during the ceremony. It wasn't magic or a traditional miracle. It was the activation of a deep spiritual connection, a reminder that we are part of the same divine creation." Cardinal Bianchi nodded solemnly. The Holy Father dedicated his last years to investigating that connection. He consulted not only with theologians, but also with scientists who study the therapeutic relationship between humans and animals. What he discovered confirmed something he had always intuited, that in that relationship there is a spiritual dimension that the Church has ignored for centuries. Indeed, and now he wants us to share that message with the world, concluded Gabriella, comprehending the magnitude of what she was witnessing. That's why he allowed me to be here tonight, not just as a journalist, but as a witness. As a messenger, Bianchi gently corrected. The manuscript must be carefully studied, presented to the world in a way that it can be understood and accepted, not as a break with tradition, but as its deepening and expansion. At that moment, the main doors of the basilica opened with a crash. Authoritative voices and hurried footsteps announced the arrival of the Swiss Guard, undoubtedly led by Cardinal Mercalli in his relentless search. "They've found us," whispered Lucia, terrified. "What do we do now?" "Nothing," Isabella responded with surprising calm. "We don't have to hide or flee. The truth is destined to come to light. That's precisely the message." Indeed, when Cardinal Mercalli burst into the chapel, followed by half a dozen guards, he stopped short at the scene he witnessed. A girl who supposedly couldn't walk, standing next to a golden dog. A cardinal known for his absolute loyalty to the late Pope. A journalist and the director of the mysterious animal shelter. "What does all this mean?" demanded Mercalli, though his voice betrayed more perplexity than authority. "It means that Pope Francis was right," responded Bianchi with serenity. "The world is ready to understand a deeper truth about our relationship with all creation." With an elegant gesture, he again pressed the sequence at the base of the altar. The compartment opened, revealing the manuscript. "This is his final legacy, Eminence. A text that invites us to expand our understanding of divine communion to include all God's creatures." Mercalli approached cautiously, as if he feared the book might burn his hands. Upon taking it and opening it to the first page, his expression visibly changed. "This is undoubtedly his handwriting," he murmured, turning the pages with growing amazement. "And these ideas, he discussed some with me, but I never imagined he had developed such a complete theology around them." "The Pope knew it would need time to be accepted," explained Bianchi. "That's why he prepared this entire plan. Lights, appearance at his funeral, the connection with Isabella, the gradual discovery of the manuscript, all designed so that the message would be received when we were prepared to understand it." As the tension in the chapel began to dissipate, a new sound filled the space, the soft murmur of prayers coming from the exterior plaza. Despite the late hour, a crowd was beginning to gather spontaneously in front of the basilica. "What's happening?" asked Lucia, approaching one of the side windows. "News travels fast," replied Gabriella with a small smile, "especially when it involves what many consider a miracle. It seems all of Rome has heard about the girl who walks again thanks to a special dog." Cardinal Mercalli, after a moment of deep reflection, made a decision that surprised all those present, including himself. "Open the doors of the basilica," he ordered the guards, "and prepare the central balcony. If this is truly a message that the Holy Father wanted to share with the world, I will not be the one to stand in its way." In the following minutes, an improvised but deeply emotional procession traversed the central nave of St. Peter's. Cardinal Bianchi holding the manuscript, Isabella walking with increasingly firm steps, light advancing with dignity by her side, Lucia and Gabriella following them with tears of emotion, and finally Cardinal Mercalli, whose severe expression had given way to a mixture of amazement and humble acceptance. When they emerged onto the central balcony, from where new popes are traditionally announced, the square was already filled with faithful tourists attracted by the unusual nighttime movement, and journalists who had hurriedly responded to the first rumors of extraordinary events. Cardinal Bianchi, after receiving a nod from Mercalli, approached the microphone. "Brothers and sisters," he began with an emotional but firm voice, "tonight we are witnessing a historic moment in the journey of our faith. Pope Francis, even, after departing from this world, has left us a message of profound wisdom and universal compassion." Raising the manuscript for all to see, he continued, "In these pages, the Holy Father invites us to broaden our understanding of divine love to include all creatures, recognizing that in each of them dwells a spark of the sacred." A murmur, ran through the square as cameras focused on the unusual group gathered on the balcony. The image of Isabella, radiant and standing next to the golden dog that had moved the world during the papal funeral, was being broadcast live to millions of people. As a sign of the truth contained in this message, continued Bianchi, we have witnessed what can only be described as a miracle of healing and spiritual connection. Isabella Cortez, diagnosed with an incurable degenerative disease, has regained the ability to walk after her encounter with this extraordinary animal, whom the Pope called Light. The girl stepped forward, bending to caress the dog who remained serenely by her side. Her voice, amplified by the microphones, resonated clearly in the square. What I have learned is that we are all connected in God's creation. Animals are not just creatures at our service, but companions on our spiritual journey, capable of teaching us about unconditional love and true compassion. As she spoke, an extraordinary phenomenon began to manifest. The first rays of dawn were breaking on the horizon, illuminating the square with a golden glow that seemed to concentrate especially on the papal balcony. This manuscript, Cardinal, Bianchi resumed, will be carefully studied and shared with the world when the appropriate time comes. But its essential message can be summarized in a simple truth. Compassion toward all creatures is a direct path to the divine. Lucia, observing the scene from the side of the balcony, felt her heart overflowing with contradictory emotions. Joy for Isabella's miracle, amazement at the revelations of that night, and a deep gratitude for having been chosen to be part of something so transcendental. "Do you think the world is ready for this message?" she asked Gabriella in a whisper, who was taking notes frantically. The journalist smiled, pointing toward the square where thousands of people, many with tears in their eyes, were contemplating Light with reverence. "Look at their faces," she replied. "The world has been waiting for this message for a long time. We just needed someone, or something, to remind us of what we already knew deep in our hearts." The following weeks passed in a succession of events that forever transformed not only the lives of the protagonists of that extraordinary night, but also the global perception of the relationship between spirituality and respect for all forms of life. The manuscript of Compassionate Creation was translated into dozens of languages and published simultaneously throughout the world, generating passionate but respectful debates both inside and outside the Church. Far from provoking the schism that some feared, Pope Francis's posthumous teachings were received with surprising openness, especially among younger generations. The Divine Hope Shelter transformed into an international center for studying the therapeutic and spiritual relationship between humans and animals. Under Lucia's direction and with official Vatican support, it expanded its facilities to include educational programs, innovative therapies, and spiritual retreats centered on connection with all forms of life. Isabella Cortez, completely recovered from her illness, became the youngest ambassador of this new initiative. Traveling the world alongside Light, she carried the message of healing and spiritual connection to communities on all continents, inspiring a global movement of compassion toward animals that transcended religious and cultural boundaries. "What I experienced wasn't just physical healing," she explained in her conferences, now with the wisdom of someone who had contemplated profound truths. "It was an awakening to a broader understanding of our interconnection with all creation. Each time we show kindness toward another creature, we come a little closer to the divine." Gabriela Sanchez, now internationally recognized for her exclusive coverage of those extraordinary events, founded a magazine specifically dedicated to documenting stories of connection between humans and animals from a spiritual and scientific perspective. Sacred Bonds, quickly became a reference publication, building bridges between religious communities, scientists, and animal rights activists. "I never imagined that night in St. Peter's Square would change the course of my life," she confessed in an interview. "But when you witness something truly transcendental, you can't simply return to your previous life and continue as if nothing had happened." Cardinal Bianchi, with the unexpected but firm support of Cardinal Macaulay, established within the Vatican a permanent commission dedicated to studying and applying the teachings contained in the manuscript. The 1st of May, a date that coincided with the anniversary of the shelter's founding, was officially declared as Compassionate Creation Day, a celebration that was quickly adopted by religious communities around the world. During the first commemoration of this day, a year after the extraordinary events, St. Peter's Basilica hosted an unprecedented ceremony. The Chapel of Creation, enlarged and renovated for the occasion, was officially consecrated as a space for meditation and prayer, dedicated to spiritual connection with all forms of life. Most surprising to many was the presence of Light, who now lived between the Vatican gardens and the shelter, depending on the season. The golden dog, with a dignity that continued to amaze everyone who knew him, occupied a place of honor next to the altar during the ceremony. "Some might question the presence of an animal in such a sacred place," commented Cardinal Bianchi during his homily. "But as Pope Francis taught us, true sacredness doesn't reside in buildings or ceremonies, but in the ability to recognize and honor the divine spark present in all creation." As he spoke these words, a ray of sunlight passed through the central stained glass window, illuminating precisely the place where Light was serenely resting. Many of those present held their breath, remembering how a similar phenomenon had occurred during the Pope's funeral ceremony, when the dog had approached the coffin. "They're not coincidences," Isabella murmured to Lucia, who was observing the scene with tears in her eyes. "They're reminders that we are exactly where we should be, doing exactly what we should do." The afternoon of that historic day, as the sun began to set over the Eternal City, a small group gathered in a quiet corner of the Vatican gardens. Lucia, Gabriella, Isabella and her parents, Cardinals Bianchi and Macaulay, and of course Light, shared a moment of intimate reflection away from the cameras and media attention. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Light hadn't appeared at the ceremony that day," commented Miguel Cortez, who had gone from being a skeptic to becoming a firm defender of the new spiritual vision promoted by the manuscript. "The Pope used to say that God writes straight with crooked lines," responded Cardinal Bianchi with a serene smile. "I believe this message would have found its way to the world in one form or another, but there's a special beauty in how it happened, a perfect symmetry that can only be attributed to a higher intelligence. The important thing," added Lucia while gently stroking Light's golden fur, "is that millions of people now see animals differently, not just as pets or inferior beings, but as companions on our spiritual journey, capable of teaching us profound lessons about unconditional love and compassion." Gabriella, who had been taking notes discreetly, closed her notebook and contemplated the Roman sunset. "Do you know what's most extraordinary about this whole story? That a simple gesture of love, a dog approaching a coffin, a girl being touched by his kindness, has generated a global movement that is changing how we understand our relationship with the natural world." "It wasn't a simple gesture," Isabella gently corrected, kneeling to look directly into Light's eyes. "It was a reminder, a sign that true spirituality isn't about separating ourselves from the world, but recognizing our deep connection with all life." All. As the group silently contemplated that reflection, a final ray of sunlight illuminated the scene, creating a golden halo around Light. For an instant, everyone felt an invisible but palpable presence, as if Pope Francis himself were there, contemplating with approval the flourishing of the seeds he had planted with such dedication during his final years. And so, in that Roman garden bathed in the light of sunset, culminated a story that had begun with an inexplicable gesture of animal compassion and had evolved to become a global movement of spiritual renewal. A story that, like the manuscript itself, spoke of the capacity of all creatures to connect with the divine and of the transformative power of love when expressed in its purest and most selfless form. The legacy of light, as millions of people around the world now called it, wasn't simply the story of an extraordinary dog or a visionary pope, but an eternal reminder that in the divine plan, even the humblest creature can become a messenger of the deepest truths. Dear listeners, we hope this story of spiritual connection between light and Pope Francis's legacy has deeply moved you. To continue this emotional journey, we have prepared a special collection with equally captivating stories about the transformative power of animals in our lives. Find it here by clicking to your left. If this narrative of faith, compassion, and miracles has touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give the video a like. Each day we share unique stories that explore the beauty and complexity of our connection with all forms of life. What personal experiences have you had with animals that changed your spiritual perspective? We await you in the comments to continue this inspiring conversation.